Welcome, everybody. Welcome, True Seekers, to the Oh Hell Yeah Show. TJ Hale, it's great to have you here today. I've got an outstanding guest with me. He wrote a book recently called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration. And the reason it's politically incorrect is because it's very correct. His name is John Zmirak. John, I got to apologize. I didn't confirm. I'm saying your last name wrong, and I'm terrible with names. Zmirak. They should all be thrown out. They should have stopped them at Ellis Island. Did he really? What did that look like? Interesting. So you talk about Ellis Island. So here, for people listening and joining us on the stream, the thing I really like about your book is it goes into the historical perspective. It's an easy read. I think people should pick it up. It's less than 200 pages, but it spends about the first half of the book talking about the different phases of immigration to the country. And I get really frustrated, one, when I don't know things, but two, when you're having a debate and people are just talking about what they've learned in the last 24-hour news cycle, 3 months of events, or last year of their life when they started paying attention. I think your book helps to clarify a lot of the ideas and the way that we set things up, which is why I use the colonial flag, the way that we design the system to work, and the way that it's gotten away from that and what that's done to the country. So I'd be remiss if I didn't give you a proper introduction. You're the author of Wilhelm Röpke, I'm going to say that wrong, Swiss localist, global economist. You've edited a number of popular guides to higher education and served as press secretary to Louisiana Governor Mike Foster. You have a BA from Yale and a PhD from Louisiana State. Holy smokes. So, lest anyone think that you're not an intelligent person or you're just a bigoted, xenophobic racist for writing a book that says education should be immigration should be reformed, just want to throw that out there. And for any progressives that are listening, do you hate? Are you a xenophobe? Do you hate immigrants, John? Let's just start with that. So for people who are wondering what else we're going to talk about, I just want to go through a couple things that you mention in the book. You talk about building the wall, which obviously we need to get to. You talk about, let me go my screen back up. You talk about the founders wanting to make the country a place where people shared values and basically worked together and became this idea of e pluribus unum. And you also talk about how the situation in Mexico has not only become untenable because Mexico is collapsing, but you mentioned that 80% of the women who cross through are viciously raped. You talk about how the elites in our country take advantage of that and how Mexico has sent us more immigrants since the Teddy Kennedy immigration bill than any other national group. So I don't really know where we want to start. I think maybe we'll go back a little bit and talk about the founders' ideas on immigration. You mentioned Benjamin Franklin. I pulled a quote from your book where he said, "The most ignorant, stupid sort of their own nation, this being Germans, are coming to Pennsylvania. They're not being used to liberty. They know not how to make modest use of it." George Washington said, "By an intermixture with our people, they would get assimilated to our customs, measures, laws, in a word, soon become one people, if by decency and propriety of conduct they appear to merit the enjoyment." And you kind of make the observation that they don't talk about the civil right. They don't talk about the country being forced to allow people to come here. They talk about responsibility and duty and the behavior.
Nobody has a to knock on your door and come live in your house. A country is like a household. It is entirely up to you whether you choose to rent out your basement or choose to give one of your bedrooms to a homeless person. It is entirely up to you. You decide. Maybe the best metaphor is adoption. If you want to adopt a child, that's a meritorious thing. That's a good thing. Maybe it's a charitable thing. If you decide that's, good for your family, if you decide that's what you need, you have a perfect right to do it. But the government doesn't have the right to come take a foster child, unlock your door, and put the foster child in your house. The foster child doesn't have the right to break into your house and live there without your consent, and then gain squatter's rights, whereby he has the right to eat whatever's in the refrigerator and to inherit whatever part of what you were going to leave to your children. And right now, illegal immigrants are acting like squatters who are breaking into your house. They have no right to be here. We have every reason to remove them. We have every reason to keep them out, just the way you want to keep intruders out of your house. It's that simple.
So what do you say to the naysayers who say, well, you know what, John, it just sounds like you hate humanity. There's a social compact and a social fabric, and these are human beings. And you just don't sound very Christian for a guy who runs a website called The Stream, which is a Christian website.
I don't run it, I write for it. But
sorry.
I would ask them, do they want to let every human being on earth move to the United States? Are they willing to let every human being in the world move here? Or will they impose some limits? I think most of them, if you really press them, will say, no, we can't have all 6 billion or 7 billion people moving to America. There have to be some limits. And I would say, welcome, you are now officially an immigration restrictionist. Now it's just up to us to debate what's the right number and who are the right people, how many people, how quickly, what kind of job skills, what kind of education level they have. And we want to match the people coming in with jobs that are here that they could do that native-born people can't do. And guess what? Native-born people can do the jobs. The unskilled job that used to be taken by unskilled immigrants like my grandfather, we outsourced those jobs to Asia, Latin America, Africa. We don't have big empty states waiting for people to homestead and start farms. All the land is taken. In that sense, America is full. We don't have room for 1 million new low-skill immigrants every year because we're not building new auto plants. We're not building new computer factories. We're not opening new states that we have taken from the Indians and settling them with homesteaders. We don't need 1 million low-skilled immigrants a year. And one way we know we don't need them, the wages of the native working class, if you adjust them for inflation, have been flat for the past 45 years. American workers, blue-collar workers like my dad, haven't had a pay raise in a lifetime. That tells you one thing. We're importing too many low-skilled workers to compete with the native-born workers, so nobody's getting a pay raise. Who benefits from that? Big corporations. And that's why the Republican establishment, why the Paul Ryans of this world, were always for more immigration, and why they frustrated President Trump's attempt to build a wall. The companies that give them millions of dollars a year benefit from cheap labor. On the other side, the Democrats benefit from cheap votes, from people coming in, becoming citizens, or having kids who become citizens who vote for more government benefits. 75% of Hispanic immigrants who become citizens favor bigger government and more government benefits. 75%. So if you are concerned about the right to life, if you're concerned about gun rights, if you're concerned about religious liberties, all the things that the Democratic Party is dedicated to destroying, you should be very concerned that we're turning one state from red to blue after another. California used to be Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, and Pete Wilson's political base. Now it's a one-party failed state run by the Democrats. What happens if Texas turns like that? What happens if Oklahoma turns like that? We will live in a one-party failed country. And America will become more and more like the failed countries that people are fleeing from and trying to move here. I'm a native New Yorker, but I now live in Texas. One problem is a lot of people leaving California, come to Texas, but then they vote the way they used to in California and turn Texas into California. Well, the same thing happens with a lot of immigrants from poor countries that have big government programs, that don't have free market, that don't have ordered liberty, that don't have solid property rights. They vote and teach their kids to vote the way they voted in their native countries.
Yeah, Gloria, you heard of Gloria Alvarez. She talks about that. She's Brazilian, and she calls it voting what you flee from, right? They rush out of a country as refugees to have productive lives, and they bring the ideas with them. I want to talk about the historical aspect of this. You mentioned in the book, I'm in the first third of it, where we actually had, I wasn't very familiar with Chester Arthur's Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And so when people throw that at me, I say, look, there's a precedence for this, whether you agree with it or not. Let's look at the results of that. And the Supreme Court actually held that up. And despite that, Chinese flourished in our country. They had some really, really rough times. This comes up when you talk about slavery. But
we have made bad immigration laws in the past.
Sure.
There have been arbitrary and unfair immigration laws, okay? There were immigration laws in the past, in the 1920s, that were designed to keep a sort of WASP dominance in America. A Northern European dominance. Now, I can say those weren't a good idea, but they were perfectly constitutional. It's up to us to decide who we want in this country, and we're allowed to be arbitrary. If we decided we only want to let in immigrants who are as good looking as Melania Trump, and we just called it the Melania Standard, we're only going to let in supermodels and sports heroes, that would be stupid. But it would be perfectly constitutional and completely within our rights as a country to pick whatever immigrants we choose, as many as we want. We could allow 0. We could allow 100 million if we wanted to. It's entirely up to us. Just as parents have a right to adopt too many children or adopt no children, to have 12 children, to have 1 child. It is your choice. That is what it means to be a free person. And as a free country, we get to decide who comes here and how and how many. The world doesn't get to decide. They're going to come in against our will. The word for that is invasion.
Sorry, I didn't have my mic on. The reason that I like the Chinese argument is because you used it to buttress the idea that they were actually exploiting these people to keep wages down. And today, when you say, look, they're exploiting illegal immigrants so that they can keep wages stagnant, you can't complain about stagnant wages and unfettered immigration at the same time. Eventually, you're going to have to pick one. And you go
right,
on.
But I don't like that law because it specifically singled out Chinese people to discriminate against them. And that was wrong. I would oppose any law that singled out Mexicans or Central Americans. No, I'm talking about people with low skill levels, low educational levels for whom we don't have jobs. Whether they're white, yellow, red, or black. I wouldn't want a bunch of low-skill Irishmen or Croatians, that's my ethnic background, Irish and Croatian. I wouldn't want a bunch of high school dropouts from my grandparents' home countries flooding America and going on welfare. It's not about ethnicity. It's about economic competition. It's about growing welfare programs that are bankrupting the country. It's about importing social dysfunction. Government unions lobbying for more immigration because they want more people to be on welfare because their jobs are administering welfare programs. So we need to be very clear. This is not about maintaining a white America. This is not about any kind of ethnic balancing. This is about giving a fair chance to blue-collar people in America, many of whom are not white, to move up the economic ladder by not constantly undermining their wages with the lowest possible skilled immigrants in the world, people coming from desperate countries who are willing to work at almost any wage and illegally, often in dangerous conditions. If they get injured, they have no insurance, they go to the public emergency room. So, you and I, we pay every month for health insurance. We're also paying in taxes to subsidize companies using illegal immigrants, because when their employees get hurt, the hospitals we're paying for take care of them for free. Those companies benefit by paying, bone dirt poor wages, $1 an hour. They don't have to pay insurance. So the rest of us are subsidizing these cheap labor companies. That is immoral and it's destructive of the country. It hurts everyone regardless of his race.
Yeah, I want to move to another theme, but you did mention in the book that I think it's 57% of current immigrants are on some sort of welfare. The cost of the head of the household is almost $6,000 in federal tax subsidies. And in terms of the theme of diversity, right, the type of people from certain nations, you really do emphasize it's about skill. And at a time when we are outsourcing low skill and we're automating low skill, we're bringing in the highest majority of unskilled immigrants. So on the theme of diversity, you mentioned that we always talk about diversity being a strength when really it's decency. And I had a really good line, but I forgot what it was to kind of wrap this up.
Diversity is neutral. Diversity is not a strength. It can be a weakness. I go to Germany and see the rape epidemic that's sweeping over them because they brought in all these Middle Easterners who don't believe women have the right to say no. Diversity can be a weakness. If they don't share your values, they don't share your culture, they're not willing to obey your laws, they're not willing to assimilate, then diversity is actually a toxin. It actually will kill you. Diversity can lead to civil war. Diversity is only a strength if everyone coming in agrees to assimilate to the basics of the culture, to play by the rules, to pay their fair share, and to be loyal to the country. We have stopped even trying to get people to do that. The new textbooks that they use in the state of California, which therefore are adopted all across the country, they actually say that it was wrong to ask immigrants to assimilate. It was wrong to ask them to learn English, wrong to ask them to learn the American system. That was somehow racist. To ask foreigners who come to your country to learn your language and play by your rules is somehow wrong. This is not political philosophy. This is insanity. This is a kind of self-destructive national masochism that you would think our enemies had come up with it and planted it here in order to destroy America. What the Democrats are pushing is an unpatriotic, anti-American agenda that wants to dissolve our country and tear it apart.
So I just watched Chappaquiddick the other day. Don't know if you've seen that or not, about our good friend,
yes,
the Lion, Ted Kennedy.
Very well-made movie, yeah.
Pretty good, right? And the thing that was interesting is I was reading in your book at the same time Ted Kennedy's quotes about what the Immigration Act of either 56 or 65, I'm dyslexic.
It was 65, and he wrote the Immigration Act. Ted Kennedy created our current immigration crisis. He wrote the bill that changed it. I think he might have written it on a bar napkin after, because the way he wrote it, most legal immigrants do not come in because there is a job for them. They don't come in because there's an economic need for them. They come in because there's somebody's cousin, or there's somebody's brother, or there's somebody's uncle. It is nepotism. He wrote in Boston Ward Heeler kind of nepotism into our immigration system, and he called it family reunification. Doesn't that sound wonderful?
It does.
Yeah, we
melts my
have
heart.
to reunify you with your cousin. Or, this 50-year-old guy and his older sibling have to be reunified. And they can't be reunified in the old country. No, they have to be reunified in America. That's utterly absurd. It was a nice piece of rhetoric that covered up Essentially, he wanted to bring more Irish to Boston as voters, okay? And he wrote the whole immigration system to benefit his family's political machine.
Well, let's just go back to rehash what he said. First, our cities will not be flooded with 1 million immigrants annually. False. Under the proposed bill, the present level of immigration remains substantially the same. False. Secondly, the ethnic mix of this country will not be upset. False. Contrary to the charges in some quarters from those racist bigots, the bill will not inundate America with immigrants from any one country or area or the most populated and deprived nations of Africa and Asia. What would Politico?
Also false.
Would PolitiFact give that a mostly false?
Yeah, also false. I mean, every single thing he said was false. It's like what he was. It's pretty similar to what he must have told his wife the night he was out with poor Mary Jo Quebecny.
That's exactly. Oh no, that was a great rap.
Yeah, we're serving hot meals to the homeless. Yeah.
Mexico has now 3 times more legal immigrants as any other nation on the face of the planet. I want to talk about Mexico because when this came out, the news hadn't broken about Obama's wonderful child jailing program. I forget the name of the rep in Texas, the Democratic rep who came out and said, yeah, they kind of wanted to keep this hush-hush. But I actually like the fact that an opposition media, a real opposition media, the one who hates Trump, helped bring to light things that should have never been happening under the past administration. And now Trump actually has the opportunity to fix it. But Mexico is a disaster. It's in a tailspin. It is a dangerous place to live. I think you just wrote an article a couple weeks ago about how the amount of homicides in the northwestern state have gone from less than 100 to over 2,000 in a couple of years. Let's talk about what it's like being the neighbor of a country whose citizens need to flee for their lives, for their livelihoods, and the fact that coming to America makes you automatically an upper-class citizen on Mexican living standards. Just getting here will do that for you.
Well, I would say we are in a military emergency with the situation in Mexico. The cartels control large parts of Mexico. More than 1,000 political candidates have been murdered just in the year 2018. An entire police force of an entire city was found to be working for the cartels. They arrested the entire police force. This level of chaos is extremely dangerous for us to have on our southern border, pouring in an uncontrolled way. I won't say uncontrolled, that's a mistake. The influx into the United States is controlled by the cartels. They charge $5,000 a person to smuggle people in. They rape 80% of the women and girls, according to the Huffington Post, who come in from Central America. The U.S. southern border is not the sovereign territory of the United States. It's the sovereign territory of the cartels. And we are inviting a humanitarian disaster by refusing to enforce our immigration laws, by not sealing off the border. The Democrats want to eliminate ICE. What does ICE do? ICE tracks down the members of the cartels and deports them from the country before they set up the cartels to run American cities. I was in the once beautiful Mexican city of Monterrey in 2000. It was lovely, it was orderly, it reminded me of Dallas. It is now in ruins. Its economy is wrecked, its political system is destroyed because the cartels targeted it and took it over. Do we think we're magic that they can't do that to Dallas, that they can't do that to Atlanta, they can't do that to New York and Washington, D.C.? They can, and if we don't wall off the border and stop them importing their soldiers, they will. It's a threat to national security. President Trump must seal the border. We must enforce the law through what's called E-Verify, that checks whether immigrants are legal to work in the country. It's a computerized system set up by the government. Most people think it's mandatory. It's not. People like Paul Ryan have fought to keep it from being mandatory. Isn't that amazing? You don't have to check whether someone is legal to work here, whether they're using a stolen social security number, committing identity theft. You as an employer are not obliged to check, courtesy of your open borders Democrats and your open borders cheap labor Republicans. In the Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration, we lay out the simple, common sense, law and order steps required to gain control over our chaotic immigration status quo, to stop the influx of people through the desert, dangerous passageways at the mercy of drug cartels, and impose some kind of order and decency so our country does not fall apart.
you mentioned the name of the book again. The thing I really like about this, there are so many studies and facts and blurbs. I mean, I'm gonna put it up on the screen here. Just on the back page, you go over some of the major issues why anyone who's partisan or nonpartisan should be very, very concerned about what's happening at the border. And there was a time when this wasn't really a partisan issue. It wasn't about the skin color or strictly the politics of who was coming over. But some of the things you talk about in here, you actually have some suggestions. You talk about the 15 building blocks of Mission America. I know we got to wrap up soon, so I want to talk about that and the 20 honest questions any skeptic should ask in the back of your book, because I love
so we raise a lot of concerns, a lot of worries, and so we offer a comprehensive answer that could be done through public policy, mostly through Congress, through the president, through some bureaucratic fixes. The central ones are build a wall, secure the border, e-verify, force every employer to find out whether workers are legal or not, because that's the magnet bringing people across the border. Check when people overstay their visas, like the terrorists who hijacked the planes on 9/11 in 2001. Deport them when they overstay their visas. Reduce the number of low-skilled migrants coming into the country who are constantly putting a downward pressure on the wages of native-born Americans. Get rid of chain migration so that we base who we let into the country on something more than Ted Kennedy's nepotism. And eventually you want to get rid of birthright citizenship, whereby if someone is flying from North Korea to Estonia and their plane stops in Chicago and they give birth to a child, that child is an American citizen and their whole family gets to stay and collect American welfare benefits. That's not what the 14th Amendment was written to say, and the president should challenge it in court, and Congress could pass a law saying this is not what the 14th Amendment means, and I suspect that the Supreme Court would uphold that. So there are simple, reasonable fixes through our political system that could fix this crisis, but it's in the interest of the Democrats and the cheap labor lobby to keep the crisis going because they profit from it.
Last thing before I let you go, John, I've got a commenter, Bloodline, who says, I'd love to get trustworthy sources that give me the true facts about the effects of illegal immigrants on the black community. I would suggest you run out and buy this book immediately. There is a lot of information. The appendix is full of studies. And the one thing we didn't talk about that we need to is the myth about illegal immigrant crime. I hear it almost every week. Someone saying, well, you know, immigrants, and even Cato comes out and says they don't commit crimes like the native population. So you talk about the children of immigrants. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, identity theft is a crime, and a very serious one. It can destroy people's Social Security benefits. It can mess up their taxes. They get audited. You've got elderly Americans, veterans, being audited by the IRS because it turns out, well, why did you earn $15,000 last year roofing houses in Texas? And the person says, well, I'm 90 years old and I live in Vermont. Some illegal immigrant was using their Social Security number, and it's up to them to prove that they weren't roofing houses in Texas. Illegal immigrants violate laws all the time, and those are not victimless crimes. And a fair number of them are connected to cartels. And every week we read about members of cartels who are here illegally, who committed murder, hideously butchering people. Illegal immigrants are vastly disproportionately in prison compared to Americans of the same social class. So this myth that they just come here and they're very humble and deferential and they work and they don't cause any trouble and we owe them citizenship because they have worked illegally here for years, it is just that. It is a myth, it is propaganda, and it serves nobody but the cheap labor Republicans and the cheap vote Democrats.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Zmirak, am I saying it? I'm going to screw it up again.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
John, I appreciate you being with us. I'd recommend everyone
much.
go out and read the book, and there's a lot more information we didn't have time to cover, so I may make a follow-up video covering some of my favorite themes from the book. Thank you, John. Best of luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, ladies and gents, again, I'll probably make a follow-up video highlighting maybe my 10 or 15 favorite points from the book. In terms of the question Bloodline had on the black community, I think the stat was that it costs about $140 billion a year to have immigrants come in. and they basically pay about $30 billion in taxes, so it's a $100 billion shortfall. And most of the job opportunities that are taken are by lower skilled labor, a higher proportion of which is in the Black community. I've read some really, really great articles about that, and I'll probably do it in a follow-up video. But I just want to thank everyone for being here. I try to stream at least once a week with a compelling author and talk about some great ideas. And this book's definitely worth reading. So I appreciate you being with me, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.